CEO Yoon Tae-kyung thought he was just firing a rebellious intern to save his perfect company. He was wrong. As Soraya Daniels walked toward the elevator to leave forever, a single movement shattered his amnesia. Tae-kyung suddenly realized this stranger was actually his missing fiancée from the life he forgot. Now, he must chase down the woman he just humiliated before she vanishes out of his life a second time. Yoon Tae-kyung sat behind his massive mahogany desk, looking every bit like the powerful leader of a Seoul tech empire. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his black suit was sharp and expensive. He valued order above all else. To him, the woman standing across from him was a glitch that needed to be deleted. "Pack your things, Miss Daniels," he said. His voice was as cold as dry ice. He did not even look up from his papers. "This company is built on precision. We do not have room for your untraditional ideas." Soraya Daniels gripped her security badge until her knuckles turned gray. She was a brilliant intern from London, but in this silent, glass-walled office, she felt like an outsider. "I gave this company everything," she whispered, her voice trembling with hurt. "You gave us chaos," Tae-kyung countered. He finally looked at her, his gaze hard and distant. "Security will escort you out. Do not look back." The heavy office doors clicked shut with a finality that felt like a trap. Tae-kyung expected to feel relief, but instead, a phantom ache started in his chest. He stood up and watched through the glass partition as Soraya walked toward the elevator. Beyond her, the Seoul skyline was bright and cold, but he only saw her lonely silhouette. Then she paused. She reached up to adjust her scarf with a specific rhythmic flick of her wrist. The air suddenly left Tae-kyung's lungs. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. That one small gesture cracked the fortress of his amnesia. The memories of the tragic accident 5 years ago came rushing back like a flood. He wasn't looking at a fired intern. He was looking at a ghost. He realized that the woman he had just fired was the fiancée he thought he had lost forever. With a look of pure panic, the CEO abandoned his desk and began to run. Soraya Daniels did not cry. She kept her head high as she stepped out of the CEO's office, even though her heart felt like it had been crushed. The long hallway of the Seoul tech empire felt colder than usual. The walls were made of glass and polished steel, reflecting her lonely figure as she walked. Every step she took in her sensible work shoes seemed to echo through the silent floor. To her left and right, rows of employees sat at their white desks. Usually, the office was filled with the sound of clicking keyboards and hushed phone calls. Today, it was different. As Soraya passed by, the typing stopped. One by one, her coworkers looked up. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed to see her being treated this way. Others whispered behind their hands, their eyes following her like hungry hawks. "Is that the intern from London?" A voice hissed from a nearby cubicle. "I heard she tried to change the old traditions," another whispered back. "The CEO himself fired her." Soraya gripped the strap of her bag. She could feel the heat rising in her face, but she refused to let them see her break. She had moved across the world for this job. She had stayed late every night, trying to prove that her new ideas could help this old company. Now, it was all over because of a man who looked at her as if she were a broken piece of machinery. Behind her, 2 tall security guards followed at a distance. They didn't speak, but their presence made the walk feel like a march to a prison cell. They were there to make sure she didn't touch anything or talk to anyone. She felt small and exposed under the bright fluorescent lights. As she reached the center of the office, she saw her desk. It was already cleared off. Her notebooks and her favorite pen were gone, packed away into a plain brown box. It was as if she had never been there at all. The untraditional girl was being erased from the perfect corporate world of Yoon Tae-kyung. She reached the heavy silver elevator doors and pressed the button. Her reflection in the metal doors showed a woman who was tired and hurt, but still proud. She reached up and adjusted her scarf, a small habit she had whenever she was nervous. She didn't know that, behind the glass walls of his office, the powerful CEO was watching her every move. She didn't know that her simple gesture had just changed everything. Inside his quiet office, Yoon Tae-kyung stood as still as a statue. He watched Soraya through the glass wall. She looked small against the vast, busy office floor. He told himself that he was glad she was leaving. He told himself that his company would finally be peaceful again. But as he watched her reach the elevator, his chest began to tighten. It was a strange, sharp pain he hadn't felt in years. Soraya stopped in front of the silver doors. She reached up with her right hand and adjusted the silk scarf around her neck. It was a quick, rhythmic flick of her wrist, 3 small taps and a gentle pull. The world around Tae-kyung suddenly tilted. The bright office lights seemed to flicker and fade. In an instant, the cold glass of his office vanished. He wasn't in Seoul anymore. He was standing on a rainy street in London. The air smelled of wet pavement and sweet vanilla. He saw a younger version of himself, laughing and holding an umbrella. Next to him was Soraya. She wasn't wearing a business suit, she was wearing a bright yellow coat. She looked at him with eyes full of love, not the hurt and anger he had seen moments ago. She reached up to fix her scarf in that exact same way, 3 small taps and a gentle pull. "Don't worry, Kyung," her voice echoed in his mind. It was a warm, melodic sound he hadn't heard in a lifetime. "I'll always find my way back to you." Suddenly, a loud screech of tires filled his ears. The sound of breaking glass shattered the memory. Tae-kyung gasped, clutching the edge of his mahogany desk. His breath came in ragged bursts. For 5 years, his mind had been a blank wall. His family told him he was a lonely businessman who had survived a car crash. They told him there was no one else in the car. They told him his past was unimportant. They had lied. The wall in his mind was crumbling. The glitch wasn't Soraya. The glitch was his own life. He looked back through the glass. The elevator doors were sliding open. Soraya was stepping inside. If she got on that elevator, she would disappear into the crowded city. He would lose the only person who held the truth about who he really was. Tae-kyung didn't think about his reputation. He didn't think about the important meeting starting in 5 minutes. He turned and bolted toward the door, his heart screaming her name. Tae-kyung burst out of his office like a runner at the start of a race. His expensive leather shoes thundered against the polished floor, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. Just outside his door, a group of men in dark suits stood waiting. They were the board of directors, the most powerful people in the company. They were holding tablets and folders, ready for the multi-billion-dollar merger meeting that was supposed to start right now. "Mr. Yoon, the investors are waiting in the conference room," the oldest director said, stepping forward. "We need your signature on the final contract." Tae-kyung didn't even slow down. He brushed past them so fast that the papers in the director's hand fluttered to the floor. "The meeting is cancelled," he shouted over his shoulder. The directors gasped. They stood frozen, watching in total shock as their serious, controlled CEO sprinted down the hallway. Tae-kyung didn't care about the billions of dollars or the reputation he had spent years building. All he could see was the silver elevator door at the end of the long hall. It was starting to slide shut. "Soraya," he yelled, but his voice was drowned out by the noise of the office. He ran past the rows of desks where the employees sat. They all stood up, their mouths hanging open. They had never seen Tae-kyung move faster than a slow walk. Now, he was jumping over a fallen chair and dodging a delivery cart. His tie flew over his shoulder, and his lungs burned with every breath, but he didn't stop. The memory of the yellow coat and the smell of vanilla was still fresh in his mind. It felt like a string was tied to his heart, pulling him toward the elevator. He could see Soraya's face through the narrowing gap of the doors. She looked sad and defeated, staring at the floor, unaware that the man who had just fired her was charging toward her like his life depended on it. "Hold the door," he screamed, his voice raw. He was 20 feet away. Then 10. The doors were almost closed. Tae-kyung reached out his hand, desperate to catch the light. He knew that if those doors locked, Soraya would be gone, and the truth about his life would vanish with her. He put every ounce of strength into one final, frantic burst of speed. Tae-kyung's fingers caught the edge of the metal doors just as they were about to lock. With a loud grunt, he forced them back open. The elevator groaned, the sensors beeped in protest, and the doors slowly retracted. He stood there, gasping for air, his chest heaving under his expensive suit. Inside the small, mirrored space, Soraya looked up. Her eyes were wide with shock, and her face was still pale from the humiliation of being fired. She stepped back, her shoulders hitting the back wall of the elevator. She looked at his messy hair and his crooked tie as if he had lost his mind. "Mr. Yoon," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Security is already following me. You don't have to do this yourself." Tae-kyung couldn't speak yet. He stepped into the elevator, the doors finally closing behind him. The small space suddenly felt very hot. He looked at her, really looked at her, searching for the girl in the yellow coat. The silence was heavy as the elevator began its long trip down to the lobby. "Why did you fix your scarf like that?" he finally managed to ask. His voice was cracked and raw. Soraya frowned, looking confused and a little frightened. "My scarf? It's just something I've always done. My grandmother taught me. Why does it matter to you? You already fired me." The elevator reached the ground floor with a soft chime. The doors slid open to the grand, marble lobby. Dozens of people were walking by, and the security guards were waiting near the exit, ready to make sure Soraya left the building. Tae-kyung reached out and grabbed the metal door, stopping it from opening all the way. He blocked her path, his eyes burning with a mix of pain and hope. "5 years ago," he said, his voice dropping to a low whisper, "I was in an accident. I woke up in a hospital and didn't know my own name. My family told me I was alone." He stepped closer, ignoring the stares of the people in the lobby. "But when you moved your wrist, I saw a street in London. I saw rain. I saw you." Soraya froze. The anger in her eyes turned into something else, something that looked like a deep, old wound being opened. "Who are you really?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "Because the man who just fired me is a stranger. But the man talking right now, he sounds like someone I buried a long time ago." Tae-kyung felt the world spinning. The busy lobby around them seemed to disappear, leaving only him and Soraya in the small space of the elevator. He reached out, his hand shaking, but he didn't grab her arm. Instead, his eyes fell on something he hadn't noticed before. A thin silver chain hung around Soraya's neck, disappearing under the collar of her shirt. As she breathed, the chain shifted, pulling a hidden object into view. It was a ring. It wasn't on her finger. It was hanging like a lucky charm against her heart. The ring was unique. It was made of dull, hammered gold with a small, deep blue sapphire in the center. It looked old and well-loved, not like the shiny, perfect jewelry sold in the stores of Seoul. Tae-kyung's heart skipped a beat. A sudden, sharp memory pierced his brain like a bolt of lightning. He remembered sitting in a small, dusty shop in an alleyway in London. He remembered the smell of old wood and the sound of a ticking clock. He had spent 3 months of his savings on that exact ring. He had chosen the blue stone because it reminded him of the color of the ocean on the day they first met. "That ring," he whispered, pointing a trembling finger toward her chest. Soraya quickly tucked the ring back under her shirt, her eyes filling with tears. It's nothing. Just a piece of junk from my past. It's not junk, Tae-kyung said, his voice growing stronger. It has a blue sapphire. There is a small scratch on the inside of the band, right next to the date. He swallowed hard, the tears finally stinging his own eyes. I bought that for you. I told you it was a promise that I would never leave you, no matter what happened. Soraya's hand flew to her mouth. She began to shake, her knees buckling until she had to lean against the elevator wall. How do you know that? My Kyung-soo died in that car. They told me his body was never found in the fire. They told me he was gone forever. My family lied to both of us, Tae-kyung said. He stepped forward, no longer the cold Seo, but a man finding his soul. I am not just Yoon Tae-kyung. I am your Kyung-soo, and I am so sorry I forgot. Soraya stared at the man in front of her. For months, she had looked at him from across the office and felt a painful mix of love and hate. He looked exactly like the man she had lost, but his soul had seemed dead. He had been a cold, heartless boss who didn't care about people. She had spent nights crying, wondering how the man who once promised to protect her could become so cruel. But now, looking into his watering eyes, she saw the truth. This wasn't a man who had chosen to leave her behind. This was a man who had been hollowed out. You really didn't know? She asked, her voice cracking. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched the sleeve of his expensive suit. For 5 years I thought you moved on. I thought you saw the accident as a way to escape a girl who didn't fit into your world. I thought you hated me. Tae-kyung shook his head frantically. I didn't even know I was in London. They told me I was alone in the car in Seoul. They gave me books, photos, and a history that felt like a movie script. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, but I believed them because I had nothing else. The anger that had burned in Soraya's heart for years began to melt into a deep, heavy sadness. She realized that while she had been mourning his death, he had been living a lie. His family had stolen his name, his heart, and his memories. They had turned him into a machine to run their company. They told me you were dead, Kyung-soo, she sobbed, using his real name for the first time. I went to a funeral with an empty casket. I moved here to be close to where you grew up, just to feel like I hadn't lost everything. I took this internship just to see your face one last time, even if you didn't know me. Tae-kyung reached out and gently took her hands in his. His touch was warm and familiar, a sharp contrast to the cold office walls around them. The CEO was gone. In his place was the man who had bought a sapphire ring in a dusty shop. I'm not going back to that desk, he promised, his voice firm. And I'm not letting you walk out those doors alone. Soraya looked at him, finally seeing the man she loved hidden behind the expensive suit. He hadn't abandoned her. He had simply been lost in the dark, and her small gesture with the scarf had finally turned on the light. Tae-kyung did not wait for the elevator to take him back up. He led Soraya through the lobby, his hand tightly holding hers as if she might disappear if he let go. He walked past the confused security guards and out to his private car. He had one destination in mind, the grand, silent mansion where his mother lived. When they arrived, the house felt colder than his office. His mother, Madame Yoon, sat in the garden drinking tea. She looked elegant and perfectly calm, the way she always did. But when she saw Tae-kyung walking toward her with Soraya at his side, her teacup rattled against the saucer. Tae-kyung? Why are you not at the merger meeting? She asked, her voice steady but her eyes darting to Soraya. And why is this girl with you? Her name is Soraya, Tae-kyung said. His voice was like a low rumble of thunder. And you knew that 5 years ago. You knew it when you told me I was alone in that car. You knew it when you told her I was dead. Madame Yoon stood up, her face turning into a mask of stone. I did what was best for this family. You were the heir to a giant company. You couldn't be tied to a girl from London with no status. The accident was a chance to start over, to give you the life you deserved. The life I deserved? Tae-kyung stepped forward, his face red with anger. You stole my soul. You let me live as a stranger for 5 years. You watched me struggle to remember who I was, and you lied to my face every single day. I gave you power. I gave you a kingdom, his mother hissed, finally losing her calm. You gave me a cage, Tae-kyung countered. He looked at Soraya, and his expression softened. I remember the rainy streets now. I remember the promise I made. You tried to erase her, but a person's heart doesn't follow your corporate rules. Madam Yoon looked at Soraya with pure hatred. She will ruin you. If you choose her, you lose everything. The board will remove you. You will have nothing. Tae-kyung stood tall, pulling Soraya closer to his side. For the first time in 5 years, I actually have something worth keeping. You can keep the company. I'm taking back my life. As Tae-kyung and Soraya left the mansion, they had no idea that the world was already talking about them. In the digital age, secrets do not stay hidden for long. While they were rediscovering each other, a video was spreading across the internet like wildfire. An employee at the office had used their phone to record the moment Tae-kyung fired Soraya. The video showed him looking cold and heartless, telling her to pack her things without even looking up. It showed Soraya's crushed expression and the security guards marching her toward the exit. The caption on the video read, "Cruel CEO fires hardworking intern for no reason." By the time Tae-kyung checked his phone, the video had millions of views. The comments were filled with anger. People were calling for a boycott of the company. They were calling Tae-kyung a monster and a bully. News stations were already showing his face on their screens, labeling him the cold-hearted king of Seoul. They hate you, Soraya whispered, looking at the thousands of angry comments on her own phone. They think you're a villain. Tae-kyung looked at the screen. For years, he had protected his reputation above everything else. Now, his face was being used as a symbol of corporate greed. Usually, this would have terrified him, but as he looked at the angry words, he didn't feel the fear he expected. He only felt a deep sense of irony. The world was attacking him for being the man his mother had forced him to be. Let them talk, Tae-kyung said, though his hand trembled slightly. They are right to be angry. That man in the video was a stranger. He was someone I don't want to be anymore. But the scandal was growing faster than they could handle. His mother's allies on the board of directors were already using the video as an excuse to kick him out of the company. Protesters were starting to gather outside the office building, holding signs with Soraya's name on them. The perfect life he had built was falling apart in front of the whole world. He had found his past, but the present was turning into a nightmare. Tae-kyung realized that it wasn't enough to just remember Soraya. He had to prove to the world, and to her, that he was no longer the man who had ordered her to leave. Tae-kyung knew they couldn't stay in the bright lights of the city center. The cameras and the angry whispers were everywhere. He took Soraya's hand and led her to a quiet part of Seoul that his mind had finally begun to remember. It was a small neighborhood with narrow streets and old brick buildings, tucked away from the glass towers of his corporate world. "Do you remember this place?" he asked softly. Soraya looked around, her eyes widening. "The little tea house with the blue door. We spent hours here during your last summer before the accident. You told me it was the only place where you felt like you could breathe." They stepped inside. The air was warm and smelled of roasted beans and dried flowers. The owner, an elderly woman with a kind smile, didn't look at the news or use social media. To her, they weren't a famous CEO and a viral intern. They were just two young people looking for a quiet corner. They sat at a small wooden table near the window. For the first time in 5 years, Tae-kyung didn't feel the need to check his watch or answer an urgent email. He reached across the table and touched the sapphire ring hanging from Soraya's necklace. "I remember what we talked about here," he said. I told you I wanted to travel the world. I didn't want to be a CEO. I wanted to be a storyteller. Soraya smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. You were so full of dreams, Kyung-soo. You used to write stories on the back of napkins. You said that power didn't matter as long as you had a voice. They spent the afternoon talking not about the scandal or the company, but about the small things. They talked about the rainy days in London and the spicy street food they used to share. It felt like a first date all over again, but with the weight of 5 lost years behind it. Tae-kyung realized that his mother had given him a kingdom, but she had taken away his joy. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the tea house, Tae-kyung felt a new kind of strength. He wasn't the man in the viral video anymore. He was a man who had been found. I have to go back tomorrow, he said, his voice firm. I have to face the board. But I'm not going back to be their CEO. I'm going back to tell them the truth. The next morning, the glass-walled headquarters felt like a battleground. Tae-kyung walked through the lobby, but this time he didn't look at the floor. He held his head high, even as he felt the burning stares of hundreds of employees. He reached the top floor and pushed open the heavy doors of the grand conference room. The board of directors was already there. They sat around a long, black table, looking like a row of judges. At the head of the table sat his mother's closest ally, Mr. Park. He held a tablet that was still playing the viral video of Tae-kyung firing Soraya. Mr. Yoon, thank you for joining us, Mr. Park said, his voice cold and dry. Though, after your behavior yesterday, we weren't sure you would show up at all. Tae-kyung took his seat, but he didn't open his laptop. He didn't look at the financial reports. I am here to discuss the future of this company, he said. The future of this company is at risk because of you. Another director shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The stock price is falling. The public thinks you are a monster. And now, we hear rumors that you are claiming to have, remembered, a life that doesn't exist. It shows deep mental instability. Mr. Park leaned forward, his eyes narrow. Your mother has informed us that the accident 5 years ago caused more damage than we thought. We believe you are no longer fit to lead. We have called this meeting to vote you out. We need a leader who is logical, not someone chasing ghosts from a past that was better left forgotten. Tae-kyung looked around the room. These men had been his family for 5 years, but they didn't care about him. They only cared about the wall of glass and the numbers on the screen. You call it instability, Tae-kyung said, his voice calm and steady. I call it waking up. You wanted a machine to run this company, but I am a man. And the woman you saw in that video is not just an intern. She is the truth you tried to hide from me. Enough stories. Mr. Park snapped. The vote begins now. All in favor of removing Yoon Tae-kyung as CEO? One by one, hands began to rise around the table. Tae-kyung felt a chill, but he didn't look away. He knew he was about to lose his kingdom, but for the first time, he didn't feel like a loser. The doors to the conference room swung open before the final vote could be counted. Soraya Daniels walked in, clutching a battered laptop and a stack of folders. The directors looked up in anger, but she didn't back down. Behind her, a group of young junior employees stood in the hallway, watching with hopeful eyes. You can't remove him for being unstable when he is the only one who actually understands where this company is failing, Soraya said, her voice clear and strong. Mr. Park sneered. You are a fired intern. You have no right to be here. I am the intern who spent 3 months studying the data you all ignored, Soraya countered. She set her laptop on the table and turned it toward the board. While you were focused on old traditions, I found a massive error in the merger you're about to sign. Your logical plan is based on numbers that haven't been updated in years. If you sign this today, the company will lose half its value by winter. The room went silent. The directors leaned in, their eyes widening as they saw the charts and red lines on the screen. It was a mistake that only someone working on the ground level, someone who actually listened to the people, could have found. Tae-kyung didn't fire me because he was cruel, Soraya continued, looking at the board members. He fired me because this company's culture is designed to silence anyone who speaks the truth. He was a victim of your rigid rules just as much as I was. But yesterday, he stopped being a machine. He started being a leader who listens. Tae-kyung looked at Soraya with pride. She wasn't just his past, she was the smartest person in the room. He turned back to the board. The merger is a trap. Soraya has the proof. You want a CEO who protects your money? Then you need me, because I'm the only one willing to listen to the people who actually know how this company works. The hands that had been raised to fire him slowly began to lower. The directors whispered to each other, looking from the screen to Tae-kyung. They realized that the rebellious intern had just saved them from a billion-dollar mistake. Mr. Park looked defeated. He realized that the power had shifted. Tae-kyung wasn't a ghost chaser anymore. He was a man with a vision, and he had the most loyal partner at his side. A few days later, the glass walls of the tech empire felt different. They were no longer cold and hiding secrets. They were clear and bright. Tae-kyung stood on a small stage in the lobby, but he wasn't hiding behind a mahogany desk. Instead of a formal speech written by lawyers, he held only a small piece of paper. In front of him were hundreds of employees, flashing cameras, and a live stream that was being watched by millions. I am here today to apologize, Tae-kyung said, his voice echoing through the hall. He didn't look like a cold CEO anymore. His tie was slightly loose, and his expression was warm. The video you saw was real. I was a man who cared more about rules than people. I forgot my own past, and in doing so, I forgot how to be human. He looked directly into the camera. I am sorry to Soraya Daniels, and I am sorry to every person in this company who felt they had to stay silent. From today, we are changing. We will be a company that values stories, truth, and heart. The crowd went silent for a moment, then a wave of applause broke out. It wasn't the polite clapping of a business meeting. It was the sound of people feeling relieved. After the cameras were turned off and the crowds moved away, Tae-kyung found Soraya waiting by the large windows. The Seoul skyline was turning a soft purple as the sun went down. He walked over to her and took her hand. He felt the weight of the sapphire ring between their palms. The board let me stay, he whispered. But things will be different now. I told them you are the new head of innovation. No more untraditional labels. Your ideas are the future. Soraya smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. And what about us? What about the boy from London who wanted to be a storyteller? Tae-kyung reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled napkin. On it, he had doodled a rough sketch of a blue door and a yellow coat. I'm still that boy, he said. I have my memory back, but more importantly, I have you. I promise that I will never let the noise of this world make me forget who I am again. They stood together, looking out at the city. They weren't just a CEO and an intern, and they weren't just ghosts from a lost past. They were two people starting a new story, and this time, they were writing the ending together.